Hello, and welcome to the Workforce Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Bray, Chief Strategy Officer at PracticeLink. In this podcast, we will focus on the latest healthcare trends in recruitment while showcasing innovative strategies, success stories, and fresh perspectives affecting the healthcare workforce. These episodes will lead to in-depth, thoughtful discussions with recognized industry-leading healthcare professionals, exploring the challenges of healthcare recruitment and beyond. Whether you're an experienced recruitment professional or just starting, this podcast aims to help you discover how experts are reshaping the industry, leveraging technology, and fostering inclusive hiring practices. The episode today is entitled The Power of Diverse Perspectives in Healthcare Innovation. My guest today is Shelli Pavone, President and co-founder of Inlightened. Shelli has more than 20 years of commercial experience in healthcare and a history of developing sales strategy and teams from the ground up. She was also named among Forbes' Next 1000 in 2021. She excels in managing change and executing adaptive programs in highly competitive segments and is dedicated to partnering with clinicians and innovators to help shape the future of healthcare. Shelli, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
As we get started, would you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to co-founding Inlightened and a bit about your work there?
Yes, of course. So, my background is really in the healthcare field for my entire career. I started out working for pharmaceutical companies, and then I spent time in the OR for medical device companies. And in about 2015, I started working for healthcare startups. And all of those experiences had given me a little bit of a unique view into the different areas of healthcare. And I always was on the commercial side of organizations. And so, starting my career in sales and then transitioning to sales leadership, I always had a pretty deep connection with the healthcare professionals and clinicians. And I understood the products that they wanted to use, how they were using things. And working for those really large companies, you would assume that there's a ton of engagement with healthcare professionals and researchers, and that every solution that comes to market is brought to market because there's been a ton of really deep research done to ensure that that fits the needs of patients and providers and that it's something that's needed and necessary. And something that I found along my career is that it's not always the case. I had many instances where many millions of dollars were spent developing something, and I would get out into the field and talk to clinicians, and they would say, "This is not what we want. This is not what we need. This is not what we asked for. Why is this what they developed?" And it was a really kind of mystifying experience for me. And when I went to the healthcare startups, it was a little bit of a different scenario, but a similar problem in that they didn't really have the time and resources to cultivate those insights from providers and patients and professionals in order to ensure that they were launching something that was going to be beneficial. And seeing this occur in so many different scenarios and watching the healthcare startups try really hard to kind of build relationships with clinicians only to end up utilizing people in their personal networks and creating somewhat of an echo chamber, I realized that something had to be done about this problem. And so I met my co-founder, Michelle Higginson, in 2018, and she had come from a background that was similar to mine in some ways, but she had also worked for a children's hospital in Boston. And so she had a really acute understanding of the needs of healthcare professionals as well. And I think we just got to the point where we said, why not us, right? Let's do something about it. And so we founded Enlightened with the idea that we could create a curated and vetted network of healthcare professionals and providers, and we could connect them with the innovators to ensure that there was a significant amount of research done with a diverse slate of experts before products are brought to market so that they can actually solve problems for patients and providers alike.
Yeah, that's great. I think some of what we'll unpack today really is about the importance of including a variety of perspectives so that we're representing those in our communities and our country, those that the healthcare industry is serving. So let's just dive right into some of the questions we have for today. What would you say are some of the most significant risks we face when healthcare innovation happens without the right experts in the room? And then can you share any real world examples where this has occurred in your work with Enlightened or other projects you've been involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most significant potential risk, right, is patient safety. If you don't have the right clinical input, these new technologies or treatments can overlook critical aspects of patient safety, and that can lead to unintended consequences or harm. And I think the most prolific real world example there is say, Theranos, right? I mean, they had really overlooked lack of input from experts in hematology and diagnostics. And that led to some terrible consequences for the patients. There have also been a lot of cases that have involved medical devices. So, certain hip implants or surgical mesh products that were launched without sufficient consultation with surgeons or really no long term data. And those devices led to really high failure rates, which caused patients pain and required, unfortunately, additional surgeries. And there were lawsuits as a result of those things. But it's pretty difficult to develop a product in a certain safety environment without consulting with the relevant clinical entities. And then I think when it comes to just general risks as far as misaligned solutions, a perfect example of that is the EHR systems. The EHR systems, there weren't a ton of input coming from frontline healthcare providers when those were developed. And I'm sure we've all heard the complaints about the EHR, but those systems have generally poor usability, and they are contributing to a lot of the clinician burnout that we see, which in turn ends up having a reduced quality of care. There have been cases where hospitals have had to replace entire systems after they've spent millions of dollars in investment. And ultimately, I think that if those innovators would have included more healthcare professionals and understood the practical needs and the workflow, we could have avoided a lot of that issue.
Right. And you mentioned the importance of those frontline workers. I think the folks that are using the technology every day are very important. What would be another piece and component to that are really the community health advocates. So, the patients themselves. I've been a part of some really well done community focus groups to kind of bring them in and get the patient's perspective on that. I know when you're sitting in a room as the doctor is charting, they spend more time doing that. It feels like that than actually examining or listening to you. Any thoughts in terms of some of the recent movements with AI being involved in some of that innovation? Are you guys testing that, or have you been asked to look into how we might be able to incorporate those other perspectives?
I mentioned provider and professional perspectives, but as you mentioned, the patient perspectives are so incredibly important, and having those patient advocates. But then, of course, speaking to patients themselves throughout the research projects as well. And we work with some really great patient organizations through Enlightened. When it comes to AI, I think there are a lot of really amazing and interesting developments that can come from that, but it has to be done responsibly, just like all of the other innovations. And I think when it comes to AI, making sure that we are developing products based off of clinical input and the frontline workers, the people who are using it, the usability. We have worked with some companies that are developing really great AI solutions. And I'm really glad that those companies are engaging Enlightened, because through us, they are talking to the right professionals. They're doing a lot of research with the clinicians and the technologists and the individuals who would be utilizing and benefiting from the systems. My fear is that, of course, not all of the people that are developing AI solutions will do that amount of research. And then, of course, I think the other issue that you deal with sometimes with AI is that we can build in biases into the AI. And we're really working, I think, in healthcare alone is just eliminate some of that to provide more equitable care. And I think one of the big considerations with AI is to ensure that we are not building the biases that we hold into the AI systems, because the work towards making care more equitable would be erased in that case.
We've talked a lot about the role that the patients play as experts in this innovation. What are some of the risks when their voices aren't heard?
Well, I think from a patient perspective, they are the people that most of these solutions are trying to help. And so if you are not incorporating the information from patients, first of all, it's similar to the risks that you face if you're not discussing with clinical leaders and technologists. But I think when it comes to the patients, they are the ones that are living that disease. Patients are going to probably bring up instances where maybe a course of treatment doesn't fit into their lifestyle, or patients are the ones that are going to give you more information about what potential side effects might be a non-starter for them. I mean, I think that a lot of the clinicians out there are very much focused on making sure that the solutions that they're creating for patients are going to be in the best interest of those patients, but they have not lived the patient experience. And so they don't always think about things like side effects, or, I mean, if you look at therapies, right, there are some drugs where you're taking maybe 6 or more pills a day for something. And clinician or someone from the company might say, all right, well, that's better than the other because of XYZ, right? But patients may push back on that. There was a story, and I will butcher some of this because I don't remember all of the details, but there was a therapy that was being developed for patients on a feeding tube. And they developed a pill, a capsule, which is just not going to work in that patient population. And if they had bothered to engage patients, they would know that.
Yeah, the reason that they probably had the feeding tube in the first place is the reason that they couldn't swallow a pill, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about the success stories where those innovations with a diverse population maybe lead to some breakthrough results, and what maybe made that diversity so critical for that great outcome?
So I'd say incorporating perspectives from diverse individuals is incredibly important. And ultimately, I think that the number one, I guess, what we would call drawback to not including diverse perspectives or expertise would be inequitable care. When we don't have diverse expertise, it leads to solutions that don't address the needs of all patient populations. So there could be treatments and technologies developed with data or insights that predominantly impact one demographic. That demographic has historically largely been middle aged white men, which leaves out considerations for women, for minorities, and also elderly populations. And I think it results in disparities and unequal outcomes across the board. I think a good example of that would be cardiovascular disease, women symptoms, and also the way that the disease presents itself is very different from men for cardiovascular disease. And because it was studied primarily in men for so long, it delayed our understanding of heart disease in women. And that led to obviously poorer outcomes and higher mortality rates among female patients. And then I think that there's the other side of the coin, which is utilizing diverse perspectives in like healthcare systems, bringing in people with different experiences, with different skill sets. And I think that if you don't bring that in, you end up having more gaps in problem solving. I think that there's been a lot of study on the diversity of teams and how teams that are diverse are more innovative, they are more creative, and that teams that lack that diversity, they tend to fall into what they call groupthink, and they can miss out on really novel solutions. And I think that thinking about diversity from kind of both sides of the coin, from gender, ethnicity, and race, and then also diversity of experience, is incredibly important.
Sure. In some of the work that you've done with Enlightened, have there been some projects that you looked at going in reverse and thought, oh, okay, because of this inclusivity within this project, we came to maybe a different result than you thought or that your client thought would be there?
So we have a really interesting one. It was some research that was being done for it was, I believe, liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry. And they were doing in person research. And the client was very clear that they wanted a diverse set of experts. And they were engaging with scientists, the people that utilize this tool. And so not all of the clients specify that, which is unfortunate. However, we always ensure that we are getting a diverse mix of individuals. And because they had to be specific scientists and have experience with this machinery, they were looking for gender, racial, and ethnic diversity. And so we were able to find a really great mix of diverse professionals for this. And one of the interesting things that came out of this research that they didn't anticipate was that because there was such a difference between all of the individuals who participated in this in person research, there was a difference in body sizes and hand sizes. And turns out that manipulating this machinery, it was really built for more of a larger, more male hand size. And they were able to see through this research that they had to make some adjustments. And I don't think that neither of us thought that that was going to be something that was an outcome, right? They were just looking for diversity because they wanted people that had different experiences. And it was an interesting side effect, but it caused them to change course a little bit with what they had developed to ensure that it was actually usable for everyone.
Right. Yeah, that's a good example, especially as within healthcare and within the physician space in particular, you are seeing more women go into medical school. And, so over time, maybe some of that equipment that was produced, it doesn't fit them, or you have to have a different kit for them. I'm thinking about robotics or surgical equipment that it will look and feel a little bit different depending on those folks. I wonder way back in time if everybody was right-handed and finally there were left-handed surgeons.
Yeah, yeah.
Somebody had to go back and go, "Oh, we forgot about them."
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope you're enjoying today's podcast. Just wanted to break in here to remind you of PracticeLink's new Physician Resource Center at PracticeLink.com. PracticeLink's Physician Resource Center is a collected hub of content which includes valuable resources and information about contracts and compensation, the job search and interview process, quality of life and wellness, and many, many more areas designed specifically to inform and support physicians' professional growth and success. To check out our Physicians Resource Center, head over to PracticeLink.com today. Thank you for listening, and now we'll return to the podcast.
One of the things you said was when your clients request to have a more diverse population or panel that gets queried, I guess I'm curious, how often do you press on that issue to say this is important in what we're doing? Or another way is what steps do you take to kind of help them engage a wider range of experts?
We believe very strongly in the diversity of expertise that we are giving to our clients. And so, whether or not they ask, it is the focus of Enlighten to ensure that if we are doing this on a concierge basis, we are making sure that there is a diverse mix of professionals. Now, sometimes we'll get a project that is focusing on individuals in certain types of practice settings. And something that I think individuals think about when it comes to diversity is not that we're looking for diversity of experiences as well. People who live in different parts of the country, people who have experience working in different care settings, in different practice types. And so that is something that we will often go back to the client and say, it looks like you're wanting to engage, let's just say, cardiologists, and you've mentioned XYZ places, but are you open to considering those that are in a more community health setting? Or what about geography wise? Because, especially in the US, there is a very large difference in the way that medicine is practiced in, say, New England from the southeastern US and the West and the Midwest. And so it's important to incorporate perspectives from a lot of different areas and from people who come from different backgrounds that are treating different patient populations. And so that is something that we will often go back to the clients and mention. And then we have self-service clients too that use our technology. And I think that I'm really proud that we have cultivated a really diverse network. So if you're going to come onto the Enlightened platform and look for experts to engage, you are going to find a richly diverse network to engage with. And so I almost think that in order to get a large group of experts from Enlightened that weren't diverse, you would have to work a little harder because our network is built that way for a reason.
Yeah, that's great. Since you mentioned it, let's talk a little bit about how can healthcare providers and physicians become enlightened experts where they are being offered projects that might be of interest to them, or give us a little bit about how they become enlightened experts.
So, the Enlightened experts, a lot of the people that we've gotten in our network have come from referrals of experts that have joined in the past, but they can go to our website and apply to become an expert. We have a vetting process, but really that process is about digging in and understanding their background, their strengths, their interest, because we want to build a really unique bio for these individuals to be hosted within our network. And so that the companies that are looking to connect with them can really connect with the desired expertise. And so that they understand this person's backgrounds, the things that they've done. And so throughout the vetting and the onboarding process, we ask questions about, have you pioneered anything? What have you done that you're really proud of? What type of patients do you treat? What are your passions? What is your interest? What do you like talking about? And so ultimately, we do that process up front so that we can better understand our experts, we can match them with better opportunities. And then also so that we don't have to go through and ask 25 questions every time there's a project that they might be interested in. We can just connect them and everybody can get something out of the engagement. The experts get to talk about something that interests them, something that they're passionate about, and the companies get to learn from these people who have a ton of experience in these areas.
It sounds like the sourcing group for your experts does a lot of in depth interviewing and collecting some of those key data points. What have you seen either post COVID as Enlighten got started? Have you seen a theme in the projects or a certain need for particular experts in a specialty or area of the country?
So I think that healthcare does tend to go in trends like everything else. And those shift from year to year. Post COVID, certainly wearable technology was very big, remote patient monitoring. There was a shift to being able to service patients or treat patients from their homes, which I think has been a really amazing shift and innovation in healthcare. It was obviously done out of necessity, but it's really, I think, revolutionized patient care in a lot of ways. And I also think that being able to treat patients in their home helps to solve some of the inequities in care as well, because healthcare is not equally accessible for all people. And so, we've seen a lot of the wearable technology, remote patient monitoring type things since COVID. And then the rest of it is cyclical. There are certainly in demand specialties all the time, like oncologists, cardiologists, cardiovascular surgeons. And then, of course, we have a lot of engagement with different AI systems. And that's really big in like radiology, helping to train the systems in radiology, which I find incredibly interesting. And we've been really excited that we've been able to help with those projects.
Not surprised on the specialties there that are the most in demand. I'm curious, Shelley, with those experts, are they always paid opportunities or are these typically volunteer pieces just to provide their opinion and expertise?
So I would say that almost 100% of the time they're paid. That is one of the other things that we thought about when we were starting Enlightened, there are so many clinicians that are approached to give their opinions sometimes to like startups. And these people spend so much time in school. It has become harder and harder to, I think, make a living as a clinician. And they have really incredibly valuable expertise. And so we wanted them to be compensated. Now, we have really big pharma companies that work with us, and we have incredibly small startups that work with us. And when we bring clinicians or healthcare professionals into the Enlightened Network, we ask them to list their hourly rate for these consultations. And then we ask them if they're open to offers. And I would say 99% say they're open to offers. And so if Pfizer comes a knocking, they're probably going to pay the full rate. But there are so many times when the smaller, newer healthcare startups want to engage experts, and they'll reach out to the experts and ask them if they'll take a lower rate for their time. And they almost always say yes because they're interested in the innovation and they're passionate about it.
And I think for folks who get into medicine and healthcare, it's intrinsic in them to help and take care of others. That's why a lot of us got into this field. If we're at the bedside or not, it's part of who we are.
Absolutely.
I want to go back a little bit to the success story you mentioned about the remote patient monitoring, some of that home health, which I think bleeds over also into the growth of telehealth that we've seen, and really how those key units together, the technology aspect along with that innovation have really helped drive that access to care. You mentioned it that we do have a very inequitable healthcare system in this country, and I think it would be great to just kind of go through some of that and talk through what that means that you see that brings to the market to Tela, and then further advancing those folks in rural areas that will continue to suffer as the physician shortage worsens in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID, as bad as it was, it gave us access to some more of these innovations, the remote patient monitoring, but another one that I think is going to go a long way in helping with the healthcare disparities, the equitable care, and giving people without maybe access to healthcare or treating different populations is remote clinical trials or decentralized clinical trials, as they call them. We have seen a major uptick in that. We are partnered with Walgreens to provide the staffing for their PIs and sub Is for their decentralized clinical trials. And I think the evolution of that is going to be a big help in reducing some of the disparities because traditionally clinical trials were conducted out of academic medical centers, and there's obviously a significant amount of the population that does not have access to an academic medical center. And so the people who were studied in clinical trials, really we were limited to those who could get to an AMC relatively easy. With the adoption of decentralized clinical trials, we really just need people to be within 5 minutes of a Walgreens, which I believe 90% of the population is. And so I think that that's something that's really going to go a long way in ensuring that we have more diverse populations enrolled in clinical trials. And a lot of studies have been done and a lot of work has been done that have shown that having a clinical PI or sub I who is of a racial or ethnic minority leading the trial, it also helps with enrolling patients from racial or ethnic minorities as well. And so with our partnership with Walgreens, they are very focused on that as well. And so I think that this is going to have a great impact on those disparities.
It sounds like it will. I think it's interesting how they've started to call it either convenient care or bringing those things where we do have those shopping centers, or it might be a Walmart or something throughout the communities where they don't have a lot. They may not have a lot of restaurants or other options, but they do have some of these retail and shopping areas that could really help drive and bring some of that care a little bit closer to home. Shelly, anything else you want to cover with us today before I wrap up?
I've enjoyed this discussion and I just love to see the innovations that are coming through. And, Inlightened and we can be a small part of helping those be successful, it's the best thing.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. You and Michelle have a lot to be proud of as you've launched this project. So, on behalf of myself and PracticeLink, we want to thank Shelli Pavone for appearing on this Workforce Wisdom podcast. For more information on how Inlightened can help your organization with curated top-tier healthcare experts on demand, visit getinlightened.com. That's GETINLIGTENDED.com. For listeners, feel free to reach out with any thoughts, insights, or questions about anything we covered today, or if you wish to receive more information on how PracticeLink can help both physicians and recruiters, please visit our website or email plmedia@practicelink.com. My name is Christy Bray. I thank you for listening to Workforce Wisdom.